Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove here today with another Omnibus review. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the first Star Wars book that I've actually looked at on the channel so far, which is a bit weird for me to think about, to be honest, because I'm a big Star Wars fan, I'm a big comic book and Omnibus fan, obviously. But even though I've been doing this channel for well over a year now, I think closer to 18 months at this point, this is the first time I've looked at a Star Wars Omnibus specifically, so thought it was time to rectify that and finally take a look at one. And I'm going to start off with the Star Wars Darth Vader by Kieron Gillen Omnibus. So Darth Vader is pretty much one of my favourite characters, really, in all of fiction. I think he's one of the most iconic cinematic villains that there's ever been. And this is a book and a series that I think overall does the character a lot of justice. I had a good time reading this book. So today I'm going to take a look through it, showcase it, discuss it in a bit of detail, and maybe help you make up your mind as to whether or not this is a book you yourself want to check out if you haven't already. So this is the second printing, recent reprinting of the book that came out a bit earlier this year. So I imagine there'd still be copies available if you do decide you do want to go ahead and buy it. But this is the DM variant cover as well, which I'll point out because I absolutely love this. It's a stunning piece of artwork by Mark Brooks, and it just looks like a scene ripped right out of Return of the Jedi in the Emperor's throne room here. It just looks so photorealistic. The level of detail here is just absolutely amazing. I love it. Looking around the rest of the dust jacket, you got the spine here, pretty plain but looks quite nice. You've got the Star Wars Darth Vader logo there, your creator names, and a little hooded Palpatine looking nice and sinister down there at the bottom. And then on the back we get another piece of cool artwork here featuring Vader, and then a blurb down there giving you an idea of what to expect in the book, plus the contents down there in the bottom left corner. But basically this is the full 2015 Darth Vader series that Kieron Gillen wrote, and this ran alongside the main Star Wars series that also started in 2015. And that was written by Jason Aaron. It does have an omnibus of its own, and I will cover that on the channel as well at some point. Before we get too far into this book though, I just want to give a spoiler warning, just in case you've never read this Darth Vader series and you don't want to have any plot details ruined for you. I'd hate to do that if you don't want it, so fair warning, I will show stuff off and talk about some story details here in a fair amount of depth. Whilst I won't attempt to cover everything, there will certainly be some things that I do talk about, so if you don't want to hear anything at all, again, fair warning. But if you don't mind, or you've already read the book, then obviously feel free to stick around. We'll take a look through this. The covers in here I thought were really cool. I like the way they're presented in the book. You get the issue number down here at the bottom. Otherwise it's just like a plain cover just featuring the artwork, none of the series logo or other information like that. And then here we go then, so Star Wars Darth Vader in the kind of title crawl style. You can basically hear John Williams' epic score going through your mind as you read through this. So in terms of when this book is set, it's pretty much immediately, or at least very shortly after, A New Hope and the destruction of the first Death Star. And it's a really interesting point to explore really for Darth Vader, because he was really the last surviving Imperial with any level of authority after the Death Star blew up. Because, you know, we had Grand Moff Tarkin and, you know, whoever else, all the other officers that were on that station when it exploded. Vader obviously kind of spun off into space in his TIE fighter. And now he's kind of definitely in the bad books with Palpatine. You know, he's taking all the blame for it. And he's really effectively demoted in this story. It's quite interesting. This opening scene in the first issue I think is pretty cool. He goes into Jabba's palace. The whole thing works as a kind of evil mirror of the beginning of Return of the Jedi, when Luke goes in. Yeah, but the story then, so effectively, yeah, Palpatine is angry with Vader, blames him for the destruction of the Death Star and the failure that represented for the Empire, because, quite frankly, there's nobody else left for him to blame. So even though Vader wasn't really in charge of what was going on with the Death Star, that was pretty much Tarkin. But with Tarkin being dead, obviously, you know, nothing he can do about that. So it's Vader who takes the brunt of the Emperor's anger. He demotes him and puts this other guy in charge, this General Tag. So Vader has to try and work his way back up in his level of power, really, in his position of power within the Empire. And at the same time, he's trying to track down the young rebel who destroyed the Death Star to figure out who he is. And not too far into this book, he does discover the name of that young rebel as being Luke Skywalker, which is the moment, of course, where Vader realizes that he has a son. And this is a pretty epic moment when it happens in the book, because he therefore realizes that the Emperor has lied to him for nearly 20 years about his children having died when Padme died. And it kind of just further cements in his mind the desire to hatch a scheme of his own to eventually try and convert Luke to the dark side and to overthrow the Emperor eventually. Now, having seen the films, you know, part of reading this book, which makes it, you could say almost ruins the experience at times, is with a series like this that's set between two other well-known stories, as in A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, you already know like which characters, for example, will not die in this story. You know, we know that Vader's going to make it through this book no matter what happens, because we know exactly where he is at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back, so nothing can happen in here that derails the continuity too much in that sense. But nevertheless, I always thought that that period of history between those two films, episode 4 and 5, was a really interesting one, because quite a bit of time elapses between those two movies. I think it's about 3 years in the timeline. You know, and clearly as of the start of Empire Strikes Back, a lot of things have happened in between those two movies. So I think it was good for this book and the Jason Aaron Star Wars series to explore some of those events, to see how you kind of get from point A to B between those two films. We do get the introduction of these key recurring characters that we see on page here. So there is this woman here, she's Dr. Aphra, who ended up becoming quite popular. In fact, she spun off out of this book into her own series. There was a Dr. Aphra ongoing series that ran for about 40 issues, I think, after this series concluded. And these two droids as well, this evil C-3PO basically, called 000, and basically an evil R2-D2, this droid here, BT. And they are basically murder robots, you know, that's pretty much what they are. Evil droids that just like to kill everybody, anytime, any place, for any reason. Very much just an evil C-3PO and evil R2-D2. That's pretty much the simplest way to explain who they are and what they are. But they're entertaining, you know, they've got some funny lines throughout this book. Dr. Aphra, she's kind of like a female Indiana Jones kind of thing, but again, with a bit more of a immoral twist. So there is actually a line, I think, in here that directly parodies one of Indiana Jones' famous lines of dialogue, where he shouts that something belongs in a museum. And there's a scene here where she shouts that something belongs in an armory, something like that. Quite funny. She's okay, she's a pretty good character, but I will say that I enjoyed her more in this book as a supporting character than I did when she eventually got her own series. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But I will say that her interactions with Vader sometimes stretch the realm of believability, because Vader is an incredibly stoic, serious character, you know, whereas she is quite a wisecracking, humorous character who makes light of situations in a way that I'm not entirely sure Vader would always put up with. You know, realistically, I don't know if they'd interact to the extent that they do in this series at times. It's not totally unbelievable, and it's by no means badly written. It's just, I don't know, for me personally, I kind of thought to myself, would Vader really be putting up with this girl? You know? I don't know. But there's a reason for it. There's a reason why they're working together, and he does ultimately get something out of the deal. So that is why I guess he's putting up with her. Not really a criticism, just more of an observation that I personally had. I don't know, let me know your thoughts if you've read it before as to what you felt about Dr. Aphra and her relationship with Vader. But then we get a lot of other characters here as well. So because Palpatine is disappointed, let's say, with Vader, to say the least, he hires this mysterious man here called Dr. Silo. And Silo is basically a scientist who has created these different types of beings that are all kind of cybernetically altered or enhanced to some extent. And the idea is that any one of these, or maybe multiple of these, could ultimately serve as the replacement of Darth Vader if they prove to be superior to him by completing a bunch of different tasks. The Emperor, the Emperor is fully aware of this, and he's pretty happy for it to go ahead, because as far as he's concerned, it's kind of the Sith philosophy of survival of the fittest and the strongest. So he's pretty happy for all these characters to be pitted against Vader, because ultimately either they'll beat Vader and prove that they're superior to him, or he will beat them and prove his superiority. And either way, the strongest has succeeded, and that is the way of the Sith. So yeah, pretty cool. But it just sheds further light on this dynamic, the Sith Master and Apprentice relationship, which is such a warped kind of mentality of a relationship. It's not the kind of friendly relationship that a Jedi Master and Apprentice is. It's kind of all about betrayal and scheming. One should always be trying to secretly overthrow the other. It's just a real messed up dynamic, to be honest. But here's the moment where he discovers the name of the young rebel. So he realizes that it's Skywalker, realizes that Padme must have given birth before she died, despite what the Emperor had told him back then. And then he goes and confronts the Emperor a little bit, and pretty much just decides, as I mentioned already, that that's going to be his goal now, is to try and find Luke, to try and bring him over to the dark side, and with him overthrow the Emperor. So yeah, a lot of other stuff is happening. So with Dr. Aphra, Vader's got a whole scheme going on where he's trying to effectively build his own army, independent of the Imperial army, because he wants to have a force of his own that's separate to anything that the Emperor knows about. But then he's also got to contend with his Imperial duties. So it's quite an interesting story, because he's got to, on the face of it, he's got to be appearing as though he's following the Emperor loyally, but at the same time he's trying to cover his tracks to keep his other activities secret from both the Emperor and other Imperials who have been effectively instructed to follow Vader around and keep an eye on him and report on what he's doing. So yeah, Vader at this point in time, he's not got the strongest position of authority. As I mentioned, you know, he's effectively been demoted, and he's having to prove himself against these experiments and these other individuals. But it's a good read. Overall, it's a good read. And I've got to mention, you know, I've got quite a way into this book already without really mentioning the artwork, but Salvador Larroca, some of the artwork in here just really stunning, beautiful stuff. There wasn't really a page in here where I didn't like the artwork. I think it just looks really cool throughout. This is the Vader Down storyline though. This is kind of like the big event, probably the best story in the book, maybe the one that stands out the most anyway, because it involves a lot of the characters from Star Wars in general, as well as just Vader. But this is a story where pretty much it's Vader alone versus a huge rebel battalion. Even on this first page here, where we see his TIE fighter emerging into a whole fleet of X-Wings. Yeah, so he crash lands on this planet and is quickly surrounded by a large group of rebel soldiers. And the artwork in this particular issue, this is Mike Deodato for this Vader Down one-shot, before it starts to cross over with issues of the main Star Wars series. But because this is crossing over with Star Wars, we see Luke, we see R2, 3PO, Han and Leia all making appearances in here, and Chewie. This page though, this absolutely iconic page where you got Vader literally surrounded on all sides by so many guys, and they shout to him that he's basically got to surrender, and he declares that all I am surrounded by is fear and dead men. And that is just incredibly badass. Yeah, so, as I mentioned, because we know that Vader has to survive all this, the stakes maybe don't feel as high as they could do in other stories of this style, because we know one way or another he's going to make it out alive, despite seemingly ridiculous odds against him. But it's a cool story. There is an urgency about it, because Leia is basically taking command of the rebels, and she wants to use this opportunity, no matter the cost, to try and get rid of Vader. She sees probably the best opportunity that the rebels will have to do so, because he's all by himself. She's not wrong in that sense, but she kind of goes through a little bit of character development here, where she realizes that you know, it might be worth knowing when you're beaten, you know, not sacrificing so many lives when Vader is proving that he can pretty much take on all these soldiers. Yeah, very imposing character though. I do like the way that Vader is presented throughout this book. You definitely feel that sinister presence when he's on page, you know, scenes like this. Really kind of cool use of perspective to show just how kind of calm and collected he is in the face of this situation. It's very good. I really liked this story. I think that the Vader Down storyline was probably the peak of the stories in the book. which is not at all to say that, you know, the rest of it was bad in any way. It's just that I thought this one stood out. I think I just liked the fact that all the other characters were involved as well. There's a cool Wookiee fight here between Chewbacca and Black Chrysanthemum, I think that's his name, who's kind of an evil Wookiee. There's a lot of evil versions of characters in this story, you know. We've got evil droids, evil Wookiee, evil version of Chewie. A bit of a recurring theme, but, you know, it's all entertaining. That's the main thing. And it kind of does that classic thing as well. When you've got a story featuring a villain, you know, throughout this book, Vader is killing a lot of people. He's doing some evil stuff. You know, he's definitely not the good guy. You know, that goes without saying, really, or you'd think it would do. But it does the kind of classic thing of how do you handle a story like that when you're following a villain whose activities and motivations you won't necessarily agree with as the reader. A key way to do that, and what this story does, is basically put people in the book for Vader to go up against who are worse than he is, you know? And that's kind of what he's doing. So, and that really involves the characters that we've already seen a little bit of, like Dr. Silo. He's really the main antagonist, I would say, ultimately. But I think it's just cool as well to see Vader doing more stuff, you know, and taking an active role in a lot of these missions and these different things that he's tasked with. And I think overall that's really what the biggest appeal of it is. If you are a Darth Vader fan, Star Wars fan, and a Vader fan more specifically, I think this would be a book that you'd enjoy, at least to some extent, because effectively you're just following various adventures of Darth Vader and seeing a bit of what he gets up to in between movies. And this storyline here, which comes towards the end, this is a multi-issue storyline where Vader has to lead a squadron of Imperial forces to a particular planet where there's an uprising taking place against Imperial control. So he has to kind of quash that rebellion, which he does. Ultimately, you know, he succeeds. But, you know, not without some drama taking place along the way. There's that cover again, used for the DM variant. So that's the cover of issue 20. And this is a cool conversation as well between Vader and the Emperor. So this is after Vader has proven himself stronger than all those would-be replacements that we saw earlier on. Those different individuals who had been kind of pitted against him. And the Emperor explains the way of the Sith to him in some detail, and explains a bit of the legacy of the Sith. Yeah, it's a cool scene. I like the dialogue. I like seeing more of the interactions between Palpatine and Vader. You know, you never got a huge amount of that in the original trilogy. I know that in other media it's been explored before, but yeah, it's just cool to see it. You know, in scenes like that, see it play out. So at this point as well, Vader believes that Dr. Aphra has betrayed him, so he's kind of tracking her down. He's using these evil droids to accomplish that mission and to find her, whilst he himself is going after this Dr. Silo guy. And it's pretty cool. He has to fight a cybernetically enhanced Rancor, which is pretty dramatic, pretty epic. I mean, a lot of this book is just Vader being a badass, to be honest. Like, coming up against seemingly one unbeatable fight after another, and just proving that, you know, he's capable and strong enough to accomplish pretty much any near impossible task put before him. Really kind of showcases the power of Vader, I think. That's what this series excels at. You know, it never disrespects the character by showing him to be like weak or anything like that. No, it's the total opposite. It shows just how dominant a force he can be when he's really going for it. And this issue as well, 24, I really like this. So just to talk about this in a bit of detail, he finally confronts this Dr. Silo, who it turns out Silo was one of the guys who actually built Vader's suit, who designed it and helped construct it along with his artificial limbs, following on from his little Mustafar accident, his little oopsie-daisy against Obi-Wan. So for 20 years, this guy has had a kind of remote control switch, which when he presses it, can shut down all the cybernetics in Vader's body. So he's just kind of there, like incapable of moving, but we see what's going on in his mind, and he has these flashbacks to Mustafar. You know, flashbacks to Obi-Wan, a flashback to Padme, a flashback to himself. He kind of fights himself in a sort of symbolic way. And yeah, basically uses his pure anger, rage, and the power of the Force to come out of this. So even though his body is shut down, he uses the Force to mobilize himself and kill this dude. But the thing about this dude is that he is not really human. He's more of a program, and every time one of his bodies dies, his consciousness immediately reawakens in a clone body. So yeah, that's the next thing that he has to deal with. Yeah, overall, a lot going on in the story, a lot of action, a lot of excitement. You know, it's really good Star Wars stuff, I think, overall. And definitely gets my recommendation. As I say, if you're a Star Wars fan or a Vader fan, I think these stories are worth checking out. And as of the end of this book, and this is something that Kieron Gillen's talked about, what he really wanted to accomplish with this series was to bridge that gap between episode 4 and 5 in the sense of showing how he goes from being a bit subordinate to other Imperials like Tarkin in the first film to being the much more authoritative person that he is at the beginning of Empire Strikes Back. Because, I mean, in Empire Strikes Back, he's killing his own men and officers like it's going out of style, you know? So this shows here in these final scenes how he basically gets that promotion. He gets the approval of the Emperor again and gets a lot of power and authority back. And then just at the end, we figure out that Dr. Aphra is basically going off to star in her own series, which she, of course, did after this. And then in the end, we just get a final little bonus story, just featuring some Tusken Raiders. In the first issue of this book, we'd seen Vader, I think it was the first issue, maybe the second or third, but early on anyway. We'd seen him go and basically just go and massacre a village of sand people for old time's sake, I guess. And that just shows a few of the people who, well, one individual, I think, one Tusken Raider who survived that assault. Anyway, just a little bonus story, but then we've got some bonus features in the back. We've got some character designs by Salvador Larroca. This is a really insightful read here, this Kieron Gillen writer's notes section. He basically breaks down what he was trying to accomplish with the series, in some case issue by issue, or story by story, and just giving a commentary on it really. And I think it was really interesting to read that after reading the series, and to just get a bit of his, you know, kind of explanations for why he did things the way that he did. Pretty interesting. And then you get quite a lot of variant covers in the back here as well, including these action figure variants, which I think are really cool. Done in the style of, I think, some of the earliest action figures that came out for Star Wars. Really interesting idea to do that, I think. But yeah, just a lot of variants in here, a lot of great scenes. I mean, you know, parodying Empire Strikes Back there, not parodying, but referencing. And a huge different array of artists as well, working on some of these. Here's a bunch more of these action figure variants, really like these. So let me know then, your thoughts on this Darth Vader book, you know, if you've read it before, what did you think of it? Did you think it was well worth reading? Did it do the character of Darth Vader justice? A worthwhile story to check out? Or maybe you didn't like it so much. Either way, please let me know. Always happy to hear your thoughts. And how do you feel it compares to the Charles Soule Darth Vader series and Omnibus? I don't have that one at the moment. Haven't read that one yet, actually. But yeah, let me know what you think about that one, whether or not it's perhaps worth checking out as well. But overall, this book anyway, definitely gets a thumbs up from me for Star Wars fans, Star Wars comic fans anyway. And hope it was useful and insightful for you to see it in some detail today. But let me know your thoughts again. Thanks for watching as always, and I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.